Here to live now from Fox. I am Andy Mack. It may be the offseason, but some big news in terms of the NFL as a meaningful step was made today for the Chicago Bears to leave the state of Illinois, potentially landing in Indiana, as the Indiana House and Ways and Means Committee unanimously approved a stadium framework bill that lays the groundwork for potentially a deal between the state and the Bears. And this would be a big deal, as you see Soldier Field, Indiana has identified a promising site near Wolf Lake in Hammond, which is just right across the border, set up a broad structure to negotiate a final agreement of this. And this is a big deal, trying to get a new stadium for the Chicago Bears. Front Office Sports here on social media saying the Chicago Bears close to a $5 billion deal to move the team to Hammond, Indiana. For nearly 3 years, the Bears have been unable to close a stadium deal in Illinois, creating an opening that Indiana has now taken advantage of. Let's bring into the conversation senior reporter with Front Office Sports, Eric Fisher. Eric, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. How big of a deal and how much momentum is this for the Bears to potentially land in Indiana?
It's a very big deal, and there's a lot of momentum behind Indiana right now. It's not a done deal, but this legislation in Indiana that would create a funding package for a dome stadium for the Bears across the border, Indiana is almost certainly going to pass and get that legislative approval, and that really puts the ball in the court of the Bears as to whether they ink the final deal to move the team across the border and do that. And, really puts the pressure on Illinois to respond. But as you correctly pointed out, and as we've written, the Bears have been at this in Illinois for almost 3 years now with not nearly the same kind of legislative momentum that's already happening in just a matter of weeks in Indiana.
Yeah, as slow as it's moved in Illinois, it's moved as equally, almost opposite, as fast in Indiana. Mike Braun, the governor of Indiana, saying Indiana is open for business. Our pro-growth environment continues to attract major opportunities like the partnership with the Chicago Bears. You mentioned it. We talk about it, $5 billion. Where does the financing, where does the money come from? Where is Indiana having that to potentially have the stadium?
The rough split is about 60% public money, 40% private money. So the Bears would be chipping in on that 40% side. The 60% would be bonds against a series of taxes. Some of it would be in that broader Northwest Indiana area on things like lodging and such that have been used often in these kind of stadium projects. Some of it would be more specifically tied to tax revenue directly from a stadium district that would be created. So things like emissions taxes and other sales and use taxes in the mixed use development that would happen around the stadium. So it's going to be a mix of local taxes that would be used to bond against and fund that other larger portion of the project.
All right, very interesting. And I want to ask you, because we talk about Soldier Field, what a historic site it is right there on the shores of Lake Michigan. They're looking at Hammond, Indiana, right across the border in Indiana. Why exactly this site? Were they looking at others? And is there anything particular about Hammond, Indiana, right across the border that stood out for them to move potentially there?
They were looking at a lot of different sites on both sides of the border, and including land in Arlington Heights, Illinois, that the Bears themselves own. In the case of Indiana, it was getting a whole other state, a whole other jurisdiction in play. And they were even looking at several other sites in Gary, Indiana, just a little further to the east. What I find very interesting about this Hammond location is it's just about as close as you can get to Chicago proper and still be in the state of Indiana. You're almost directly abutting against the state border. And so this is a thing where the Bears can do, where they stay in their home market, stay in the same general area, really only about 25, 30 miles from downtown, but in that other state, in that other jurisdiction, and this whole other set of politics that wants to do a deal with them.
Yeah, and you mentioned Arlington Heights, because this site in Hammond, right there at Wolf Lake, it might be somewhat closer than those Arlington Heights site. What are they using this Arlington Heights site? Obviously, they have it for some 3 years now. Is that still a possibility, though, for the Bears?
It's still a possibility. The big thing on that one is the way it's a lot of complex property tax legislation that the Bears are trying to work through, and they would like to have Illinois pass sort of a mega project bill where the Bears and other major developers could go to local taxing authorities and negotiate their own property taxes, and instead of just being assessed on a sort of straight one size fits all kind of basis, because as it stands now, it would be a very, very hefty tax bill for the Bears to do the project on that land that they own, and they just don't have the legal latitude to be able to do that right now, and that's what they're trying to get over the finish line in Illinois, and they just have not been able to do so, at least to this point.
And you mentioned the $5 billion price tag, some and how the financing breaks down, because obviously that's what they look at. Is there any sentimental value for the Bears to stay in Illinois? Because I think a lot of Bears fans may not want to see their team go to Indiana. Does that have any value?
Oh, sure. And it's important to remember that the Bears' first choice on this whole thing was to build literally right next door to Soldier Field and stay in downtown Chicago. It was just a little under 2 years ago that they had a big flashy press conference in downtown Chicago with the mayor and had a whole big plan to build right on that Lakeshore campus area. And there was a lot of local opposition to that. And so that pushed the Bears back out into the suburbs. But even then, the suburbs didn't work, which is then now pushed them into Indiana. But again, it's important to note that had all things been equal, and they're not, but had they been, they would have been downtown now and forever.
Yeah, and some of these plans, they're also very impressive. The renderings always very elegant, sophisticated. What comes next in terms of this saga? What are you keeping your eye on?
So this, as you correctly indicated, the Indiana legislation is moved out of committee. It's going to go to the full legislature and then to the governor's signature. So we'll be closely tracking that legislative process. But then the other shoe is in Illinois, and what does Governor J.B. Pritzker and the legislature in Springfield do, and to what degree did they respond? Because a decision's probably going to be made in a matter of weeks. We could know for certain very well by the draft in April what the Bears' long-term plans are. We could be within a couple months easy, if not sooner, of knowing this for sure. So Illinois is going to have to act fast. So I'm going to be watching the politics on both sides of the border.
My last question before I let you go here, Eric, is we've seen other stadiums and different financing models in Kansas City, Denver, obviously all private, Buffalo, Tennessee. Is this similar in any way to other cities and states and how they've had to battle through this? Because it feels like every stadium that's built, there is a huge battle around it.
Yeah, all politics are local, and very much so all stadium politics are local. These are all a little bit different. Just spent a lot of time covering the Commanders Stadium deal with the District of Columbia that just got done this past fall. That's like 75% private money. The sliders vary on this a lot, and it really does come down to what can you get done in your given market. And in this case, this appears to be this kind of rough 60-40 split appears to be what the Bears could very well get done in Indiana.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. We'll see what happens. The ball is in the court of Mayor Brandon Johnson, of the Illinois Governor, J.B. Pritzker. All right, Eric Fisher, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. You're on Live Now.